Hey guys, welcome back to another super fun episode. I am really, really thrilled for this one. We are going to have Anna from House and Homestead on here shortly, and she is an absolute wealth of knowledge about a ton of things homestead relating or related, but especially canning, vegetable gardens, how to do food preservation in general. She's going to answer all kinds of really awesome questions. She has her own courses that you can purchase in order to learn how to do these things, which I'm definitely taking advantage of. She also is the editor-in-chief of a homesteading magazine. Like, she is going to be an absolutely outstanding wealth of knowledge, and I cannot wait to get her expertise on this call so that you guys can start your gardening or your food preservation practices with confidence, even if it is a small way to start. It is something to start with, and that is what she's going to help us do. So stay tuned. This is going to be absolutely fantastic. All right, you guys. So here is my new friend whom I randomly stumbled across. Thank goodness for the internet. I can't wait for you to get to know her, but without further ado, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and your background and stuff.
All right, so my name is Anna Sikoski, and I am the creator of the House and Homestead, which is an online blog, and we can talk about all the other projects I have in the works, that branch off from there. But I basically started my blog a few years ago. I homestead, right? My husband and I moved out of the city, like bird's eye view, moved out of the city about 10 years ago, started homesteading on Vancouver Island, developed a passion for it, launched this blog to share what we were doing with the world. And then over the course of a few years, connected with some amazing people online, and published my own magazine for a while, just a digital magazine called Homesteading Magazine. And when I was kind of looking at what to do with that, a new company approached me called Homestead Living, and they reached out and said, "We love what you're doing. We would love to have you on as the editor of our new monthly magazine." And so I'm also doing that now. So I'm the editor-in-chief of Homestead Living Magazine, and then also I'm continuing to run the House and Homestead.
That is so awesome. Like, when I found you, I had no idea that you were the editor of a whole magazine. And then I went and researched the magazine afterwards. So I'm going to become a subscriber from after talking to you
Cool.
because it's so
Awesome.
cool. Um, and I love it. So we'll definitely grab links and stuff too at the end for how people can subscribe to the magazine, or is that what you call it? A subscription, right? And then like how to find you and everything too, because we're going to talk about all your stuff. Um,
Yeah.
so I guess, moving out of the city, what sparked your interest in like gardening, canning, homesteading? What really got you going there?
hmm so a number of years back, I guess it's probably around 15 years ago now, when a lot of those food documentaries were coming out at the time. So it was like Food Inc. and Farmageddon and all these like documentaries that were highlighting kind of our agricultural system, big food, big pharma, like all that, shedding a light on all that stuff. My husband and I ended up watching a lot of those things while we were living in a condo in the city. So we're from Vancouver originally. We lived in a suburb of Vancouver called Richmond, but very much still urban. And we were in a condo there and had grown up there our whole lives and had just come back recently from living in Australia for a year. And I did a lot of traveling when I was younger. That's actually how he and I met. We both worked as travel agents, and I lived in Africa for a while, and I lived in Europe for a while, and I lived in Australia for the year. And so that was kind of like what we had been doing in like our 20s and that sort of thing. And I was in my mid 20s at this point. We'd lived in Australia together and had come home and decided to get engaged. And we were like settling down and really trying to figure out like what our path forward was. And I was just feeling like, just like ill at ease. I don't even know how else to explain it. There was like anxiety. I was going through some depression. Like I just was feeling like, is this it? Like the rat race and the city, and like, what are we going to do here, right? Like, what kind of a life are we going to create for ourselves here? And I had felt that way for a while, but couldn't put my finger on what it was that I was looking for or that I was trying to get away from. And I know that anytime I would travel, I would go like, could this be the place? Maybe I want to settle down here. Like I just felt like I don't want to be where I grew up. And I started realizing like I don't really want to be in the city and in this rat race of life, right? And so at the same time, we started watching these documentaries and started really opening our mind, or like just realizing how kind of unsustainable this whole system was, right? And what we were eating and what's in our food. And, I was dealing with some mental health issues at the time. So I was taking some antidepressants and like looking for cures for that, I guess, and what I could do to help relieve some of that. And, the pharmaceuticals weren't working and I didn't really want to be taking them. And so it opened our mind to like a whole different way of living, and that maybe the solutions aren't in a bottle of pills or in, just being more successful or being more productive or whatever it was. Maybe it's actually in getting back to our roots and getting away from a lot of this stuff, right? And so I started thinking in a different direction and started thinking like, what if, what if we did this, right? And what if we, instead of looking to kind of set up our life here, like looked at a plan to move out of the city and get a little piece of land and start growing some of our own food and, reconnecting with the land and getting away from the system, which in the end is, I kind of put this two and two together. I'm like, aha, maybe it's not me. Maybe it's just that I'm in this kind of toxic system, and of course, I don't feel good in it because it's not really set up for how human beings are supposed to function. So maybe there's a better way. And maybe that's really where it all began. And right from that moment, I wouldn't say like my anxiety and depression and everything was cleared, but I felt a lot lighter because all of a sudden I felt like I had some purpose. I had a goal to work towards. I had like something better that I could work toward. And so I started learning a lot about like homesteading and taking out books at the library and learning about backyard farming and growing food and preserving and all these things. And at the time, we couldn't do a lot of it there because we were in a north-facing city condo. So, shaded balcony, couldn't grow, barely could grow herbs on the balcony. But we had a kitchen, right? So we could start there. And so we really started with food. It started with just learning to prepare our meals from scratch instead of like live off ramen noodles and microwave dinners as, we did in our early 20s. And then it was like, okay, well, where are we getting the food from and what's in it? And then I started discovering local farms and sourcing food locally. And then it's like, okay, well, hey, these blueberries are in season right now. Why don't I buy a whole bunch of them and preserve them for later? And at that time, I was just throwing them in the freezer. Like I didn't have any of these canning or gardening or any of these skills under my belt at this point. But it just sparked an interest, right? And we started dabbling and learning. And we made a plan to move out of the city when I was done school. So I think that was like kind of a couple of years after the seed had first been planted. And we pursued that and we did. And in the end, we ended up moving over to the Comox Valley on Vancouver Island. And that's where we've been for the past 10 years. And it really we started in the condo, we moved here, ended up in a rental for 3 years, but we had access to a little bit of land. And so on that rental, we talked to the owners and they let us put in a couple raised beds. So we started learning how to grow food. They had a big old apple tree and a cherry tree. So when the harvest came on, it was a perfect time to learn how to can and preserve. So I canned my first batch of applesauce, and that's a slippery slope. You start getting into that pretty quick and all the different preserving methods. And so we really cut our teeth on it in that rental. And that's also when I launched the House and Homestead was back in 2017 when we were still there. And then in 2018, we moved to our quarter-acre lot where we are now. I've been here for the past, whatever that is, 27 years, I guess, coming up. And we do have goals, a vision to have more land one day and, have all sorts of farm animals and all sorts of things. We have some backyard chickens now here. We grow hundreds of pounds of our own food now, which people are always surprised that we can do that on a quarter acre, but you actually don't need a ton of land to do this. And my mission now with what I do through the blog and through the magazine and everything is just to encourage and inspire and teach other people how to do this stuff, how to become a little bit more self-reliant wherever they're at, and show them that no matter where you live, you can get started and you can at least do something where you are.
That's so cool. I love that. I didn't realize that you guys were just on a quarter lot, which is really awesome. I mean, it is amazing what you can do in a small space. And then here I am on 3 acres of land and I cannot figure it out. So I can't wait to learn. I got my husband talked into raised beds and everything for the year. He's like, just tell me what to build, but after that, it's up to you. I'm like, that's fine.
What husbands are really good for, right?
Yes. And I'm like,
Same
okay,
thing.
we
We got
can
a
be,
pile of lumber in the front yard right now, and I'm like, okay, like we're turning the whole front yard into gardens, and
yes.
I've got the plans, but he's going out and gathering all the materials and getting it done. So,
Yes, for sure. He's like, just tell me how big and how deep. I'm like, I don't really know, but I'm gonna learn and I'll let you know, and then you can just build them for me. It'd be great, thanks. But no, that's like really amazing. So I think it's a perfect start to kind of talk about the gardening section because like gardening comes before preservation typically, like learning how to grow something. Um, so I guess like if you're talking to me, a beginner gardener who every garden in the past has either died or turned into a jungle. What are your best tips for a beginner gardener?
Oh man, it's so funny because I'm like, I think about like turning into a jungle. I don't have any tips on that at the moment because sooner or later in the season, ours turns into a jungle too, right? And even the most experienced gardeners, it happens because, and it's a good problem to have, right? It just means that it's growing and it's lush and it's producing. Um, but I have definitely been through my share of struggles with everything from seed starting. Our first seeds that we ever started, we had no idea what we were doing. This is when we were still in the condo. And we were like, let's grow some carrots on the balcony. And we decided to start them in little pots indoors, saturated them with water, like drowned these poor seeds, like put them in a room with no light. Like we had no idea what we were doing. Or there's like a little bit of sunlight. Clearly, like they died. And like now I know, something as simple as like planting carrots, you don't start them indoors, you direct sow them outdoors. And like you don't drown them and they need light and everything, right? But these are all things that you just learn as you go. And a lot of how we learned was through trial and error. So the very first thing I would say is to just get started and don't worry about doing it wrong because the greatest lessons come from our perceived failures, I would say. When I have struggled with something or it's been a challenge or we've failed at it, that is like when it really sticks. I'm like, don't do that again, right? So first of all, just like get some seeds and get started. The second thing I would say is, take some time to make a plan. Like, what do you actually want to get out of a garden? What is your purpose for growing a garden, right? Are you just wanting to dabble in it a bit as a hobby? Are you wanting to just have some fresh food during the summer months? Are you wanting to like grow subsistence crops where you can actually preserve food to eat throughout the year? And you're doing it more for like really becoming more self-sufficient. Like, what is the purpose of the garden? Ours has evolved over the years. We still mainly grow like we have main crops that we grow and we focus on that, but we've dabbled in growing all sorts of different things and you learn what you like and what you don't like and what your family eats and doesn't eat. But now we've like started to incorporate more beauty into the garden too. And we plant flowers and now I do cut flowers in the summer, which adds something as well. I feel like it's another little snippet of being self-sufficient, even though it's not feeding us necessarily. Like I don't have to go out and buy fresh flowers. I can just bring them in and enjoy them throughout the summer. So the number one is just like figuring like what do you want to actually get out of this? Because otherwise it can get really easy to go to the garden store or open a seed catalog and be like, I'm going to do all the things. And then that would be the third tip that I have is don't do all the things up front. Just start small. Start with a few crops, because the number one thing that leads to people giving up on this or leads to burnout is trying to take on too much too quick. So first of all, if it's gardening for you, just focus on gardening the first year. Don't worry about like the rest. Like preservation, for example, like you can think about that when the time comes, but don't try to like take on everything at once, right? Or if you want to like start baking sourdough bread, same thing. Like focus on that for a season until you get it under your belt. So if it's gardening, if that's where you want to start, just focus on learning about gardening and focus on starting with just a few crops. But then don't overthink it and just get started and
That's
learn
fair.
as you go.
That's fair. I think that's helpful, right? And that's the same with anything in life. Like the best way that you learn is by making a mistake first and being like, I'm not going to make that mistake twice. I think something I've run into in the past, for example, is I love zucchinis. My family will eat zucchinis. I can use it in a million different things. You know this. But then I planted like 6 zucchini plants and then woo, that's a lot of zucchinis. And those suckers go from normal size to honkers in like a day, as you know.
Mhm.
So like you run into those things where you learn. Um, I guess for like beginners, would you suggest seeds or would you suggest started plants or does it matter?
Again, it depends what you're after. There are pros and cons to each. If you're like beginner and you just want to put a few tomato plants in the ground, for example, you don't want to worry too much about like having to start them and all that goes into that. Just go to your garden store and get a few plant starts, right? Get a few seedlings to put in the ground and do a season like that where you're just, you know, going through a gardening season and getting used to like how to care for a garden and how to deal with the harvest when it comes and all that stuff.
Okay.
Some things grow better from seed naturally. So things like root vegetables, carrots, beets, peas, beans, that sort of thing. Like you can transplant them, but typically they're not going to transplant as well. So you want to just put those seeds in the ground, right? So some of those things, so the things that you would direct sow. So direct sowing is when you actually plant a seed directly outdoors in the ground, right? Those type of things tend to be better planted from seed. But if you are watching on video, you can see behind me, I have some trays of seeds under some lights. The lights are turned off right now, but so we do start a bunch of seeds indoors. And you start them several weeks before they're ready to plant out to give them enough time to get started for the growing season. So things like our tomatoes, our peppers, our broccoli, cabbage. I start our lettuce indoors even, although you can direct sow that. All sorts of flowers, things like that that I've got going, and onions in the background. We do indoor seed starting and then they're ready to go out. But if you don't have like lights set up and you're not set up for indoor seed starting, maybe those type of crops, just go buy them at the garden store for the first year, right? And work on like, okay, I'm gonna direct sow some bean seeds or whatever, right? So you don't, again, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's not like, oh, I got to plant everything from seed and stress myself out about all of that off the bat. Just do what you're able to. The benefit to starting seeds is, first of all, you're going to save money, right? You can get a pack of seeds, and sometimes that can be 25 seeds. Sometimes that can be like 400 seeds in a pack for like the same price you can get one little plant start at the
Mhm.
garden store. So yeah, that would be, I'd say the number one benefit is just the cost savings. And especially if you're looking to do it on a larger scale, you're going to want to go with seeds because then, if you're buying a couple tomato plants, no big deal. But if you're buying 25 of them, that can add up pretty quick at $3 to $5 a plant, right? And then the other bonus to starting seeds is just that you have full control over everything. So even when you're buying plant starts from the store, you don't know often 100% if they are grown organically. If you're never, and we can get into this, I don't know if you want to go down this road, but we can get into like GMO seeds and that sort of thing. People have some concern sometimes of like, is what I'm getting a GMO seed? And there's usually not a concern for that kind of stuff as gardeners, but just being able to start them yourself, you have full control over the growing conditions. They're not being sprayed with anything, they're grown in organic soil, all these type of things, right? So,
Okay. Okay. Totally fair. So on that note, for the beginner, right? Because I think I've got plenty of people that listen that are like very experienced, but then you've got a lot of me's in here. So if people were to choose like 3 to 5 options, like think of your most basic garden options for people. If you had
mhm.
3 to 5 options to have a good year under your belt, which vegetables would you suggest pairing together for those 3 to 5 for somebody to get started with?
Mm, yeah. Well, again, I think some of it comes like I like to grow a variety of things, but things that my family eats, right? Like that's I think where you really want to start is like really think about like what do you already eat on a regular basis, right? So for us, our staple crops are tomatoes, garlic, um, peas and beans, which I'll kind of lump into the same. They're legumes, but we actually do eat a fair amount of that, so we grow those. Um, Broccoli is a big one for us, and it might not be for somebody else. Again, sometimes this is like for us, we eat a lot of broccoli. My kids both like broccoli, so that's a win. It's expensive to buy it locally because it takes up a lot of space in the garden. Not tons and tons. We actually grow it pretty compact, but for some people, that's the downside is like, oh, it takes up quite a bit of space. But for us, it's worth it to dedicate that space to it. And I know from having to purchase it, and now I'm in Canada too, and now we got this tariff war going. And a lot of the broccoli that's at the grocery store is from California, for example. So that's going to be even more expensive. So this year we're like doubling our broccoli production. So that's one that's on our list. And then I mean it's hard. Like I always grow carrots and potatoes and all that stuff, right? But so the first thing I would just say is like figure out like what do you actually like to eat and start choosing from those categories of foods, right? And then from there I kind of like to have a variety of things. So for example, tomatoes, like we do grow some cherry tomatoes and we grow some slicer tomatoes, which you just slice and eat fresh in the summer. And then I like to grow some paste tomatoes as well, because those are the meatier ones that are better for preserving, because I do want to have some to make sauce and salsa out of and that sort of thing. And then, we'll grow a couple different, varieties of carrots, for example, right? We used to grow, and that's the other thing too. As you dabble, you can try different varieties of these crops and see which does best. I always used to grow an heirloom strain of broccoli because I always thought heirloom is best, and it can be for certain. It is for certain things, saving seeds and different things like that. But I actually found a hybrid seed, which a hybrid is just means that you've crossed two plants together, right? So it's not GMO or anything. It's not like made in a lab. It's just you're crossing two different strains together. And this particular broccoli is crossed so that it does really well in our climate. And so that's what I grow now. I don't necessarily save the seeds from it, but the benefit is it grows really well through our summers and everything like that. So you kind of play around, you find like your main staple crops that you want to have to put on your table, and then you can kind of experiment within there with the different varieties of those crops and think about like, well, what do I want to use this for? Again, with tomatoes is a good example. Like, do I want this for sauce, or do I just want this to slice and put on a burger? Or do I want them as, cherry tomatoes to just pick and feed to my kids? And then you can try, different varieties within that category.
That's a good point. Yeah, no, for sure. And I didn't even know, like, I knew there's a cherry tomato and like a big tomato, but I didn't know that there was like even another tomato. Obviously, I know there's different like breeds and strains and such, but it makes sense. But I wouldn't have ever even thought, like, if I go and look at the seed section, there's like 25 different tomato options, and I'm like, I pick that one
Yeah,
random.
and it can be overwhelming too, because again, even within those three categories, for example, right? And like the slicer tomatoes are typically called beefsteak tomatoes, right? And then there's the paste tomatoes are the ones that are best for canning because they're the meatiest, the least seeds and least water content. And then the cherry tomatoes. And then there's a million varieties of each one of those. And so it can get very overwhelming. So yeah, that's why I would say like start with just like what do you actually want to eat? And then, just don't get overwhelmed by it. Just choose one from that category and see how it does. And if you don't love it or you want to try something different the next year, like we're doing that this year, we're trying a tomato called a mortgage lifter, which I've heard very good things about. Um, and it's like a good slicing tomato. And then we're doing a San Marzano, which is a good paste tomato. And we're doing our favorite type of cherry tomatoes are called a sweet million cherry tomato. And so we're just doing one in each category instead of in past years when we've done like a whole bunch of different kinds. And then I like forget to mark them and I forget what I've grown. So I forget what I like and what I want to regrow. And it gets too complicated. And just simplify, simplify, simplify. Start with a few things that you're going to want to eat. And then you can add in a little bit here and there. Like add the cool like dragon tongue bean or something that's like different and cool, but like don't make that like I'm going to plant 30 of those because
Yeah.
you've never eaten it before and you don't even know if you're going to like it and it's easy to go overboard, right? Is what I'm saying. So just like simplify, narrow it down, think about what you're actually going to want on your plate at the end of the season.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. A good way of putting it. I know that you said that your very first place that you rented, you guys did raised garden beds. I'm not sure if that's what you do right now. But since that's what I'm doing, I'm going to pick your brain a little bit. So, what's your best suggestion for ways to one, like build them up? Because I know like usually you raise them up with wood and whatnot, and then you put like a tub in them and then you fill them. So, like, is there a suggestion on sizing? Is there a suggestion on contents to put in there before you put the soil on top? What's your opinions?
Yeah, so we do have now a mixture of, we've got a couple raised beds and we're actually putting in a whole bunch more right now because we're going to be expanding our entire front yard. So for us, our front yard is actually where we get the most sun. So that's number one. Before you put in any gardens, know where you're going to get your sun because most crops need 6 to 8 hours a day in the summer to like fully produce. So if you're on a new property, for example, like before you do anything, I would even take a year and just like see where the sun comes up. Sometimes you're south facing, but you don't realize you got a big tree there that's going to shade everything out in the summer. So just like assess your property first and then decide what type of beds you want to put in. So we have a mixture of in-ground beds in like a large front garden area. And then we have some raised beds, and we're going to be doing the rest of our yard with raised beds because we actually have two septic tanks in our yard, one for us, and then we have a rental as well. So we can't actually dig into the ground. So some of that is going to dictate like what type of beds you do choose. Now with raised beds, the benefit to them is again, you have full control over the soil and everything. You're not just digging into whatever soil you've got, which there are lots of ways you can improve your soil and amend it and everything else, but you're starting out, you're typically going to bring compost and or topsoil in and fill your beds and have control over that. You don't have to worry about anything that's like in the ground or what type of soil you have already. So for us, what we're doing is we're building our beds with cedar. So cedar is a really good option just because it doesn't rot. It's naturally water resistant, I guess, rot resistant. And so it doesn't need to be treated. And you don't want to use treated wood because anything that it's treated with can then leach into the soil and that can get into your food. So that would be number one. Now, as far as filling them, so we don't put any tubs or anything in ours. We just build the beds. Now we're going to be doing this on top of lawn. So we currently have a lawn and you don't want grass and weeds and everything growing through it. And we did actually make this mistake the first time we put raised beds in the rental. We dug into the sod and tried to get rid of the grass and then put the soil on top. And we ended up with a really bad infestation of a pest called the wire worm.
Oh.
And it was awful. Like it's like the worm, the wire worm. It's the larva or whatever of the click. It's a click beetle, which we have in our area. And the click beetles are not destructive, but these wire worms are. And so we could not figure out like our lettuce seedlings were just falling over and dying, and like seeds were not germinating, and it's because they were eating the roots and the seeds. And that was largely because we disturbed the soil, and then they came up into the garden bed because they were already in the ground.
Got it.
So a much better way to do this, so if you're planting wherever you're putting your raised beds, is just don't disturb what's already there. Whatever it is, you just want to smother it out. And one of the best ways to do that is get yourself a whack of cardboard. And that's
Okay.
what we've done. So we've been like saving our Amazon boxes, and like if we've got, somebody, a family member has a big appliance or something, we're like, bring us the cardboard. Getting it, you can get it free on Marketplace. We've been hauling it because we're going to cover our entire lawn, and you that helps to smother out the grass and the weeds and everything. And then you just put your soil on top of that. So then you're not disturbing anything that's already there, and you're just smothering it out. So that's and then it slowly does break down over time, right? And that carbon from the cardboard is beneficial to your soil too, and everything eventually kind of becomes one. So we're doing a thick layer of cardboard, and then it can be expensive if you're then filling a bunch of raised beds with compost.
Mhm.
Um, so first of all, I would say if you're bringing it in from elsewhere, which typically you have to unless you're producing your own compost on a large scale, which it takes a lot because it breaks down, is to order it from somewhere where you can get like a load dropped off rather than buy it in bags because that can add up really quickly. And then another thing that you can do, and we're trying this year, you can put things in the garden bed to like fill some space. You could do some rocks at the bottom, even that's going to add like drainage and that sort of thing. But we're trying a hugelkultur approach this year. So
Okay.
if you've never heard of what hugelkultur is, it's actually where you build garden beds on top of like wood, like rotting, decaying wood, logs from the forest, branches, that type of thing. Like because that's all going to break down just like compost, and it's going to add organic matter into your soil. And it's like a slow release and if you think about the forest, right, that's how it works in the forest. A tree falls, and over time, right, things grow out of it, and it breaks down, becomes part of the soil, and nobody has to go into the forest and like fertilize.
Right.
Everything naturally very fertile in there because that's how nature does it. So it's really about trying to mimic nature as much as possible, and that makes the job of the gardener a lot easier. So that's what we're doing this year. We're going to kind of fill because we're putting in a whole bunch of new garden beds, and filling them with like branches and debris and things from around the property, and then putting our compost on top of that. And then that lessens how much we have to put in, and then it's adding organic matter as it's breaking down as well.
That is so
So
helpful.
thick
Like
layer at the bottom, and then yeah, fill them up.
that's insanely helpful. Okay, my husband would be very pleased that I now have somewhat of a game plan. So thank you for
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so before we jump into canning, I did mention in the beginning that you have a couple of courses and you have more courses outside of just these two, but I know that you have like a canning food preservation as well as a gardening course. Is this the kind of information that people would be able to get out of that gardening course? Like, how does that kind of work?
Yeah. So the gardening course is called Seed to Soil. And what I love about it, the reason I created it is are other gardening courses out there. And I learned a lot of what I learned from online courses. I learned almost everything actually from online gardening courses and membership programs and that sort of thing. But I had never found one that actually walks you through the entire process from beginning to the end of the season, like step by step. Here's what you do first. Here's what you do next. Like, and so that's literally what I created. And that's why it's called Seed to Soil. And then honestly, it's really seed to harvest. But so it starts you off with like assessing your property, planning your garden, deciding what kind of garden beds you want to put in, selecting your seeds and your crops, learning to understand a seed packet so that when you do go into the garden store, you know what information you're looking for and what you can understand everything that's on there so you can make decisions about what's going to be best for you. And then how to start seeds, how to start them indoors, how to set up indoor grow lights, how to direct sow your seeds out into the ground, and then, how to care for your garden. And we go right through to the end of like, at the end of the season, what do you do to put your garden to bed, to even to save seeds from your crops if you want to save some seeds for the following year. So it really does take you from the beginning of the season right to the end and sets you up for the following year.
That's so cool. No, like I am beyond excited. I'm definitely going to be investing in that course to get started with and then your food preservation one afterwards because this is the goal this year. So I'm really excited.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so as far as like your canning and food preservation goes, I know that you said like first focus on the garden piece, and then focus on the next piece because you don't have anything to preserve until you grow it. But I guess I know you said that there's a number of ways that you can
Mhm.
or able to can or preserve food. Yeah, are there like a million types or there's like 10 ways or what? I mean, what's your answer for that?
Mhm. Okay, so first of all, you don't necessarily have to start with gardening. I just say that if you want to start with gardening, start there and then gain some confidence there before you move on to the next skill. But there are actually many ways you can come into this lifestyle. A lot of people come into it through sourdough bread, right? That's a big one. Or you can start the preserving first. Actually, for a lot of people, learning to preserve food might be the first thing that you do because maybe you don't have space for a garden right now. But you can go to your farmer's market and load up on local seasonal fruits and veggies, for a much more affordable price while they're in season, and you can preserve them for the whole year. So just saying, it doesn't necessarily need to be the garden first and then the preserving. It could be the other way around. And the nice thing, if you do it the other way around, is then you know how to do some preserving. So when you do have your own garden and all of a sudden you've got a whole bunch of tomatoes or whatever that need to be preserved, you know what you're doing and you're not like, now I have to learn this new skill while I've got food that's like literally going to go bad if I don't learn it right away.
Yeah.
So when it comes to canning specifically, there are two main types of canning. There's water bath canning and pressure canning. So water bath canning is typically what you're going to want to start with because it's the easiest and most approachable for new canners. So this is like when you're literally putting, canning in mason jars and then you're putting those in a boiling water. It's called a hot water bath, right? But a big pot in boiling water. And the heat from that helps to kill off any, potential bacteria and seal the jars, right? Now, that is good for high acid foods like most fruits. So, if you're doing applesauce or you're canning peaches or something like that, you can water bath can them. Jams, pickles, pie filling, that type of stuff, right? Fruits and high acid foods. And so, I don't want to get too technical or scientific, but on the pH scale, if there anything that's over a 4.6 on the pH scale is considered a low acid food. And so those foods now become unsafe if you water bath can them because the heat from the water bath canner, because it only reaches a boiling point, right? You can only get water up to a boiling point. It's not hot enough to kill off some potentially harmful bacteria, which would be botulism spores. So that's the biggest concern when it comes to canning. What scares a lot of people is botulism because botulism can be deadly and it's indetectable, right? So you can't smell it or see it. It's not like mold grows on the top. Um, and so that there's a potential for that with low acid foods because it can't survive in high acid foods like the fruits and stuff like that. So the boiling point is enough to kill off any other type of bacteria that might be in there, seal the jars. But with low acid foods, so things like vegetables, meats, that sort of thing, I do chicken stock, for example, combination meals in jars. Those need to be pressure canned because the heat from the pressure canner can get to much higher temperatures and can kill off the botulism spores so that they don't produce the toxin that could harm you. Because there's
Yeah.
actually botulism spores everywhere. They're in the air, they're in the soil, they're on the food that we eat. But it's only if they actually produce the toxin, and they can produce the toxin under anaerobic, so oxygen free, moist room temperature conditions in low acid or in, yeah, low acid food. So that's exactly the type of environment in a canning jar if you
Yes.
don't heat it up enough. Now, another way that you can deal with that is by acidifying it. So if you got green beans, for example, if you want to can your green beans to eat with mashed potatoes later in the season, right? You don't want to make them into pickles. Those need to be pressure canned. But if you're going to add vinegar because you want to make pickled dilly beans or whatever,
Hmm.
that's okay to water bath can because now you're adding the vinegar in and that's making it a high enough acid environment that they're safe to water bath can.
Okay.
So that being said, start with water bath canning. It's simple, it's approachable. All you need is a large pot. You can get a canning like a water bath canner, but you can just use a large stock pot even. As long as there's something in the bottom, like a canner will usually come with a rack or something you put in the bottom just so it's not directly on the bottom because you don't want the heat to be directly on the jars, basically. Other than that, as long as it can fit in the canner and the water can cover the jars by usually about a couple inches just to make sure that that water level doesn't go down beneath the jars, That's where to start. I started with applesauce and I started that way. Super easy, right? Then you branch into jams and jellies and the pickles and everything. And then eventually, if you're brave enough, you get into pressure canning. And it took me a while. And I hit around the corner the first time I pressure canned just in case it blew up because you hear these horror stories. But nowadays, it's very safe. And really, the only worry is like with the botulism thing, people worry about, but really where you have to worry is if you're taking a low acid food and you're water bath canning it. So you see these kind of, they'll call themselves rebel canners online, and they're like, my great grandma used to can green beans in a water bath canner. We all survived. Yeah, but it's a bit of roulette, right? You're rolling the dice there because you never know. So as long as you're pressure canning the foods that need to be pressure canned, water bath canning the foods that can be water bath canned, and not cutting corners like, oh, it says I need to do this for 20 minutes, but I'm just going to do it for 10. Like just follow a tested recipe and follow the instructions, and you'll be fine.
Okay. That sounds so much not easier, but simple to understand
Yeah.
than anything that, because I didn't even know there was two kinds of canning before we chatted. So that's helpful. And then obviously the other way, there's, freezing stuff, which is a good option, but not everybody has all the freezer space. So there's that problem. Is there any other, I mean, I know you can ferment foods, but I mean, is there any other ways that you would suggest preservation?
Yeah, so yeah, the kind of main way. So freezing is one, and a lot of people don't think about it because we just do it. Like, but that's a really good entry point for a lot of people because for the most part, we all know how to freeze.
Mhm.
So that's how I started when I was in the condo, right? I would buy a bunch of blueberries when they were in season, and I would just be like, hey, I can just put these in the freezer and then I have these all year long instead of having to go to the grocery store every time I want to buy them and buying them out of season and whatnot. So freezing is an option. We freeze a lot of stuff still. I freeze my tomatoes when they're ready in the summer because usually I don't have all the tomatoes I need right at the beginning. I put them in, wash them and like hull them, take the greens off the top, throw them in a freezer bag. And then when I have enough, or in the winter when it's slowed down a bit, I can take all those, run them under some hot water and the skins come right off then. And then I can turn it into sauce, right? Or we freeze our broccoli or we freeze like things like that that I'm not going to can, right? Um, Fermenting is another good one. And there's pros and cons to each type of food preservation. Fermenting, the major pro is that you're actually taking food and making it even healthier because you're getting good probiotics and everything as well, right? So fermented foods basically are you're creating an environment, a culture where there's a bunch of healthy, good bacteria, and that's good for our gut flora. And as we know, there's been a lot of talk about that in recent years and how important that is for our overall health. So you're getting the nutritional benefits of the food that you're fermenting, but you're also adding extra benefits of the probiotics that are in these fermented foods. The downside to fermented foods is it's an acquired taste. So, and for me, like I find there's some things that we really enjoy fermented, and there's some things that I don't particularly like fermented as much. So it's one of those things because it is, fermented and pickled, and so you have to find what you like. But the other thing is just that it should be still kept in a cold environment because it will continue to ferment. The longer it ferments, the more it's going to become a really acquired taste. It won't go bad, but it could get over fermented and too sour and a little bit sludgy depending on what it is. So we still keep our fermented foods in the fridge. So it does still take up some fridge space. And they do last for quite a long time, but usually I find like around the 6 month mark, the food will start getting a little bit mushy, right? Depending on what it is, the pickles will get mushy or whatever. And so it's a good form of food preservation if you're looking for a really healthy way to do it for a short, long-ish. I mean, a few months is still long, but it's not like canning can last a year or two on the shelf and
Mhm.
still be good quality. Now, the other ones beyond that, dehydrating is one. Um, and so I have a dehydrator and a lot of stuff like herbs and that sort of thing, I just air dry, right? But so for things like herbs, I just dry them, right? That's the best way to preserve them to use throughout the year. I make things like fruit leather and dried fruits and that sort of thing in the dehydrator. My kids love that. Great for like healthy lunches throughout the year. But other things like I don't love dehydrated because it changes the texture. So if you're going to want to dehydrate vegetables and then like rehydrate them to cook with, the texture can be kind of tough and leathery. And I tried dehydrated beans when you're like green beans, and I just didn't matter what I did. I
I
could not bring
couldn't
the
do
potatoes
that.
back. So the next one from there, and this is like you've done some preserving, like this is like you want to invest in this and continue on this journey, but is freeze drying. And this is a fairly new thing for home preservers, is this freeze drying method. And if you think about like what they send astronauts with to space. It's freeze-dried food. So they've been doing that for a number of years on a commercial scale, but recently they started making freeze dryers for your home, basically. Now they're still really expensive. I finally invested in one a few months ago because I got a refurbished one that was a little bit cheaper, but still like you're looking in the couple $1,000 range minimum, right? But it opens a whole new world of possibilities because you can freeze dry almost anything. So things that you can't necessarily can or preserve in another way, at least in a shelf stable way. So dairy, cheeses, right? You can do your meats, vegetables. You can do meals like you got leftovers from dinner. You can throw them in the freeze dryer and freeze dry that. And it lasts for 25 years, the food that is freeze dried, up to 25 years. So this is like if you're like looking long term, then this is a great option. But also, it just you're drying the food, but the way the process works, because it freezes at first and it sucks all the moisture out, it preserves the texture, I guess, of the foods, so that when they're rehydrated, they're almost like fresh. So you're not going to
Interesting.
get that dry, that leathery, chewy texture.
Huh.
Yeah, and again, you can do things like my son loves bananas, and we run out of bananas all the time because he's eating them all. So I freeze dried a bunch of bananas, and now, and kids, he's 2, so we like want a banana, then eat half the banana and waste the rest. And so now, if I freeze dry them, he can just eat them dried. If he doesn't eat some, they can just they're dried, so they're preserved already. So I'm not wasting any. And literally, those bananas are delicious, and you put them in your mouth, even without rehydrating them in any way, and they like turn back into like a regular banana slice, they get like rehydrated just from putting them in your mouth. Um, and yeah, and I can't really preserve, I can freeze bananas, but again, if I dehydrate them, they get like banana chip type that changes the texture. I can't can bananas. I'm not going to ferment bananas, right? So for certain things, it is the best method if you're wanting to preserve the integrity of that food. So lots of options. And then I'll just mention this too, like if you're lucky enough to have like a basement or, a root cellar, cold storage, like that's the ultimate, that's my goal. I don't have any basement here, but like one day I would love that because that's a great place to store things like our pumpkins and squash and onions and garlic and apples and like there's a lot of stuff that you don't have to do anything to it. You just have to have the right, a nice cool environment with just the right kind of humidity and moisture levels so that it doesn't shrivel up and you can just throw them in a root cellar cold storage and they'll last for months like that.
Well, that's good to know. I did not realize that. Yeah, we have all the basement space. So my husband's like, you can put whatever you want down there if you know what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's so cool. Okay, so we talked about the gardening course a little bit. So your food preservation course, does it break down between canning and different types of food preservation, or do you cover just canning, or what does that look like?
Yeah, right now, the course is just a canning course, because I think that is one that is a good entry level way to start preserving shelf stable food. So it's usually the one that most people start with. So we do go over both types of canning though. So it's called Yes You Can. And again, it's kind of like the gardening course where it's like, here's just start here, right? And we start with just like canning basics, canning safety, what equipment you need, what you don't need to go spend a bunch of money on right off the bat. And then we go through first water bath canning. And again, you don't have to do it like with the gardening course, I do kind of recommend going through it like beginning to end. The canning course, you can pick and choose. You want to go, I want to can peaches, so I'm going to go straight to that lesson. Great. But the way I designed it is to make it like the easiest projects first, and then it kind of progressively gets not even more difficult, but like once you know that, then this will be easy. Once you know this, then this will be easy, right?
Got it.
So you're like, let's start with applesauce, super easy. Okay, let's do, I can't remember what the order is, but like, let's can some fruit. Let's make some jam. And you learn the basics of that and how to make sure that your jam gels and all that. Let's make some pickles. And then we go into pressure canning and like, let's can some green beans. Let's can some meat. Hey, let's do a combination meal now where we start putting those things together and can some, I think it's chili that I do in there.
Oh,
And I show you how to do that.
that's
Because
cool.
once you start learning that, that opens a whole new world of possibilities too, where now you're canning whole meals
Yeah.
that are ready to eat, right?
Okay, damn. Now I'm gonna do both. I'm gonna do both courses. Here we go. Because I truly want to do it. Like I want to know what's in my food. I want to be able to make it or buy it from the farmer's market and preserve it myself. Like I'm to that point with this world. So
Yep.
where can people find you? I know I found you on like Instagram, your website. Are you on Facebook as well?
I am, like, quite honestly, I don't do a ton on social media because I've got so much going on, quite honestly, behind the scenes between the magazine and the blog and everything else. And we're hoping to kind of branch into some YouTube and podcasts and longer form. Like that's how I like to connect. So You can look out for that to come. But right now, the best place to find me is you can go to the houseandhomestead.com. And then from there, there's tons of free content on the blog, lots of articles on gardening, canning, food preservation, baking sourdough bread, cooking from scratch, all the things, herbal medicine, like we cover all of it. And then there's a link to my courses as well. So you can check out. So I do have the canning course, I've got the gardening course, and then I also have a preparedness course. And then I have a membership. My monthly membership program is called the Society of Self-Reliance. And that's where you get access to basically all the courses in there. And that I've just been able to actually lower the price on all these things by bringing them over to my own website. Because in true homesteader fashion, like I want to build it from scratch and not pay a whole bunch of money with all this program with bells and whistles. So the membership has just gone down from 25 bucks a month to $9 a month, which is awesome because I want this to be as accessible as possible to people.
Well, I may
And
that one.
yeah, and same with the gardening and the canning course. We went from like $97 to 59 for,
Oh,
and that's like lifetime access, right? And I've got a discount code right now as well. If you want to grab either one of them, you can just enter the code SPRING25 and get 25% off.
that's
Yeah.
amazing. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. There's also going to be a giveaway opportunity on social media starting tomorrow after this podcast airs. So the two of us are going to be doing some giveaway stuff. So pay attention for that. And you'll see the details in there and how to interact with it to get entered into some fun giveaways. And I guess before I let you go, because you've got a lot of big plans this weekend, um, what is your biggest piece of parting advice for people that are new and a little bit overwhelmed?
Yeah. So again, I think I would go back to simplify.
Mhm.
Again, don't try to take on all the things at once, right? Because that's the number one thing. And that's what gets people into this in the first place is this excitement. I want to do this and I want to do that, right? But just pick one thing. So simplify the journey. Start with one thing, but then just get going, right? Don't overthink it. Do a little bit of research, enough to get started, but then just do it. Get your hands in the dirt or get the sourdough, starter going or get your mason jars out, whatever it is, and then just start. Start wherever you're at. Do what you can where you are.
Absolutely love it. Thank you so much for your time today, Anna. I so appreciate it.
Yeah, so nice chatting with you.
Yes. Okay, we'll chat soon.
All right, sounds good.
Bye.